Character 1 Steve Rogers. Here's the uncomfortable truth. This is the only Super Soldier version that actually worked. Not because the serum was perfect, not because the science was flawless, but because the person underneath it had something none of the later versions ever did: restraint. And that detail matters more than it sounds. The original experiment wasn't trying to create dominance, it wasn't chasing efficiency, it wasn't even trying to build a weapon. It was trying to unlock potential without removing the brakes. Strength increased, endurance skyrocketed, capability expanded across the board, but something crucial stayed intact: choice. This version didn't erase weakness, it didn't overwrite fear, it didn't bypass morality. It required character to function properly. The power stopped where it was supposed to stop because the person using it knew when to stop. That balance, power plus restraint, is the entire reason this version worked, and it's also the reason it could never be replicated. Compared to everything that comes later, this version's almost boring, and that's exactly the point. There's no instability here, no loss of control, no systematic damage. Power scales with responsibility, capability scales with conscience. The serum enhances what's already there instead of compensating for what's missing. This is the experiment operating at its absolute ceiling, without breaking anything it shouldn't. And that ceiling is fragile because it depends on something the serum can't manufacture: character. Once pressure enters the system, once urgency replaces patience, once people try to shortcut the process, this balance collapses immediately. This version proves the serum can work, but only under conditions that can't survive replication. You think this version proves the experiment was a success, but actually it proves something far more dangerous. This only works once, because the moment anyone tries to recreate the power with the same restraint underneath it, the serum stops enhancing people and starts correcting for what they lack. And that's where everything breaks. And every version after this proves the same brutal truth. Copying the power was easy, copying the restraint was impossible. And the first shoutout turns a success into a failure that never stops escalating. The Winter Soldier. Here's where things truly break. This version of the Super Soldier works by wiping the mind clean and leaving the body behind. Not training, not discipline, not moral alignment. The power improves the moment the person disappears, and that should already feel wrong. This wasn't a new formula, it was the same idea pushed through a different crack. The thinking was simple: if restraint is rare and character is unpredictable, then remove the variable entirely. Instead of fixing weakness, the process removes identity. Memories aren't a side effect of the serum, they're the obstacle. The less of the person remains, the more efficient the weapon becomes. Not because the serum is unstable, but because it's doing exactly what it's told. Efficiency over humanity, output over autonomy. Compared to the baseline version, this is the first true failure. The body functions perfectly, reaction time is flawless, strength is consistent, but it only works because choice is gone. He doesn't hesitate, he doesn't question, he doesn't stop, because there's no one left inside to say no. This is worse than the first version because the safeguard is gone. Not bent, not restraint, removed. Power no longer scales with responsibility, it scales with obedience. And once identity is treated as friction, there's no logical reason to ever put it back. This is where the experiment stops enhancing people and starts correcting them. You think the tragedy is that he was turned into a killer, but the real horror is this: the serum works better the less of him remains. Sit with that. Identity isn't lost by accident, it's removed because it slows the process down. And that realization changes what this experiment really is. And if erasing one person creates a better weapon, the next version proves what happens when the serum doesn't erase humanity but hands power to it anyway. Red Skull. Here's where things turn dangerous in a quieter way. This version of the Super Soldier doesn't lose his mind, it amplifies exactly who he already was. No memory wipe, no loss of identity, just power handed to conviction. And that combination never ends well. The serum was never meant to create monsters, it was designed to perfect leaders. The hidden assumption was simple: give capable people more capability and they'll use it responsibly. But the experiment had a rule no one wanted to face. The serum doesn't correct character flaws, it magnifies them. Whatever drives you going in, ambition, fear, resentment, ideology, becomes the engine on the other side. Unlike the Winter Soldier, nothing is erased here. The person remains fully intact, and that's exactly the problem. Compared to erased identity, this is worse in a subtler way. There's no obedience programming, no external control. Power is handed directly to belief. The result isn't a weapon, it's a system. Ambition without empathy, authority without conscience. The damage isn't immediate or explosive, it spreads. Institutions bend, people follow, and because the person in control believes they're right, there's no internal brake left to pull. This is where the experiment stops producing tools and starts producing ideology at scale. And once power attaches itself to belief, removing it becomes nearly impossible. You think the failure here is that the serum malfunctioned, but that's the wrong conclusion. This is the serum working exactly as it was designed. It was never meant to make people better, only stronger. And when strength amplifies conviction, the most dangerous thing in the room isn't the power, it's certainty. So far, the damage is still human scale, belief, systems, influence. That illusion doesn't survive the next version because the next failure doesn't spread through minds, it spreads through cities. The Hulk. Here's where everything spirals out of control. This version of the super soldier doesn't activate through belief or obedience. It activates when control fails entirely. Not courage, not conviction. The power turns on when fear takes over, and that changes everything. This version was meant to fix the last failure. If ideology was too dangerous and belief couldn't be trusted, then the solution seemed obvious. Remove decision-making altogether. The goal wasn't leadership, it was containment. Keep the power locked away until it was absolutely necessary. But the serum doesn't respond to intention, it responds to stress, pain, threat, survival. The worse the situation becomes, the more the serum activates, which means the exact moments you need control the most are the moments it becomes impossible. Compared to everything before it, this isn't just a person breaking, it's the environment. Identity loss created weapons. Moral amplification created systems. This creates a walking catastrophe. Power no longer scales with belief or obedience. Power now scales with collapse. Cities aren't targets, they're collateral. Threats aren't confronted, they're absorbed. Even survival becomes a trigger. This is where the experiment stops producing soldiers and starts producing events. Once power reaches this level, containment stops being a strategy, it becomes a countdown. You think the transformation is the problem, but it isn't. The real failure is that the serum finally found a way to bypass morality and choice at the same time. And that's what makes this version so terrifying. Because the angrier he gets, the stronger Hulk becomes. If there's no off switch, up to now, every failure still felt containable. But pause for a second. We've gone from erased identity to corrupted belief to total loss of control. Do you really think this is anywhere near the worst outcome yet? Because the next version proves the damage doesn't stop at cities. Green Goblin. Here's where the experiment stops pretending it made a mistake. This version of the super soldier works exactly as intended, not an accident, not a side effect. This is what happens when instability isn't tolerated, it's optimized. After watching control fail and cities fall, the goal changes. Don't contain the power, scale it. Strip away ethics, strip away safety, strip away restraint. Treat the serum like a product roadmap instead of an experiment. The logic is brutally modern. If instability keeps appearing, stop fighting it and build around it. The hidden rule here is simple and terrifying. Optimization doesn't ask should, it asks how far. And once that question becomes the only metric, there's nothing left to stop the process. Compared to the Hulk, this is worse because it's repeatable. The Hulk is a catastrophe that emerges under stress. This is a catastrophe you can manufacture on purpose. Identity was erased, morality was amplified, control collapsed. Now the experiment removes limits entirely. The body mutates beyond stability, the mind fractures under its own output. But instead of correcting the instability, the serum leans into it. Instability becomes a feature, volatility becomes efficiency. This is no longer power reacting to the world, it's power reshaping the rules of engagement. And once catastrophe can be produced on demand, Failure stops being accidental, it becomes a business model. You think the monster is the failure, but that's the wrong diagnosis. The failure is that the monster meets the spec. Every metric is satisfied, every output target is hit, and once success is defined that way, collapse isn't a risk anymore. It's proof the system is working. Up to this point, the damage still obeys physics. Bodies break, cities fall. That limit doesn't survive the next version, because what comes next doesn't just destroy the world, it destabilizes reality itself. The Sentry. Here's where things become impossible to ignore. This version of the super soldier doesn't just get stronger, reality starts reacting to him. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, cause and effect begin to bend the moment he exists. And that should terrify you. This was supposed to be the final fix. After identity failed, after morality failed, after control collapsed, after limits were deliberately removed, the answer was refinement. Perfect power, perfect stability, no visible flaws. And for the first time it works. Not by erasing the person, not by amplifying belief, not by triggering collapse, but by breaking the ceiling on what a person is allowed to be. And here's the problem no one accounted for. Reality was never built to accommodate something like this. Compared to manufactured monsters, this is worse in every way. Before, damage had limits. Bodies broke, cities fell, systems collapsed. Now, presence alone distorts outcomes. Probability bends, cause and effect blur. Events don't happen to him, they reorganize around him. The experiment no longer creates destruction, it creates instability. This is no longer a weapon, it's a variable reality can't normalize. And once reality can't normalize a variable, it doesn't adapt, it resists. Which means this person doesn't just threaten the world, it destabilizes the rules that allow worlds to exist at all. You think this is the first true success, but that assumption is exactly the failure. Because nothing this powerful can exist without reality pushing back. And when reality pushes back against something like this, it doesn't correct it, it fractures it. That's not control, that's the beginning of collapse. Up to now, reality was bending. What comes next proves bending isn't enough, because the final version doesn't just destabilize existence, it forces existence to respond. The Golden Sentry. Here's where it becomes unforgivable. This version of the super soldier doesn't just destabilize reality, it forces reality to create its own countermeasure. Not a weapon, not a prison, a correction. And that should tell you how far this experiment has gone. This is what happens when the experiment refuses to stop. After identity is erased and morality is amplified, after control collapses, after limits are removed, after reality itself destabilizes, the serum finally achieves what it always wanted. Perfect power, perfect stability, no visible flaws. Nothing breaks immediately, nothing looks wrong, and that's the problem, because reality doesn't tolerate absolutes. When something becomes too strong to coexist with everything else, balance isn't restored, a predator is born inside it. This isn't a side effect, it's a response. Compared to instability, this is worse because it's permanent. Before reality bent, then it resisted. Now it splits. Existence fractures into opposing states. One that preserves and one that erases. Destruction is no longer emotional, it's no longer accidental, it's structural. This power doesn't threaten the universe from the outside, it forces the universe to fight itself. There's no victory condition here, no containment strategy, no return to balance. The experiment has created something that cannot be reconciled with the rules that allow existence to function at all. At this level, power isn't the danger, incompatibility is. You think the darkness is the failure, but it isn't. The darkness is the solution. The only way reality can survive this power is by trying to delete it from the inside, not because it's evil, but because it doesn't belong. And that's the most disturbing outcome of all. And that's the truth of the Super-Soldier Serum. It never stopped at making heroes, it kept escalating until the universe itself had to intervene. Because some experiments don't just go too far, they should never exist at all. It started with the simple belief that if you refined power enough, removed enough flaws, solved enough edge cases, eventually control would emerge. But every version after the first proved the same truth. Escalation doesn't solve the problem, it erases something reality depends on. By the end, the universe wasn't fighting villains or monsters, it was correcting an error, because the real danger was never the people who took the serum, it was the belief that power would eventually stop demanding a price. If one of these versions had to be erased to stop the chain reaction, which one would you choose and why?